Back in the 2000s, Tomonobu Itagaki pulled off what seemed impossible. He revived Ninja Gaiden and transformed it into one of the most revered action franchises of the generation. His approach wasn't just about technical excellence, it was about a no-compromise design philosophy. Ninja Gaiden was fast, stylish, brutal and unapologetically difficult, earning both praise and notoriety in equal measure. But by 2009 the winds had shifted. Itagaki had parted ways with Team Ninja after a highly public falling out with Tecmo, leaving the studio without its outspoken figurehead. In his absence, Team Ninja reimagined Ninja Gaiden II as Ninja Gaiden Sigma 2. Released exclusively for the PlayStation 3, Sigma 2 promised cleaner visuals, new characters and a refined gameplay experience. But refinement, as it turns out, can come at a cost. At its core, Ninja Gaiden Sigma 2 retains the DNA of Ninja Gaiden 2. Fast-paced, third-person combat that demands precision, aggression and a mastery of combos, blocks and dodges. Ryu Hayabusa still slices through hordes of demons and soldiers with his arsenal of upgradable weapons, from the iconic Dragon Sword to the bone-shattering Eclipse Scythe. Some changes genuinely improve the experience. The bow, for instance, is far more usable this time around. Thanks to the unlimited arrows and the new auto-aim feature, aiming is no longer the clunky chore it was in the original. Unfortunately, you can't charge the bow for powerful shots anymore, likely a deliberate choice to prevent it from becoming too overpowered. Still, the trade-off feels like a net positive. Sigma 2 also introduces a new weapon, Enma's Fang. It's a heavy-hitting blade perfect for crowd control, especially effective against enemies like the Black Spider ninjas. While the Falcon's talents remain my personal favorite for their sheer speed and flair, Enma's Fang quickly became a reliable choice for larger skirmishes. It's a strong addition to Ryu's already diverse toolkit. However, not all of Sigma 2's changes are for the better. One of the most disappointing alterations is how weapon upgrades are handled. In the original game, you could spend your hard-earned essence at any Muramasa shop to upgrade the weapons of your choice. It gave you full control over your progression and allowed for meaningful decisions based on your playstyle. In Sigma 2, that freedom is gone. Essence can no longer be used to upgrade weapons. Instead, you're limited to specific Muramasa shop encounters, where you're granted one free upgrade per visit. Worse yet, weapons can't be upgraded to their final level until after chapter 10. That's far too late in the game to be unlocking a weapon's full potential. This system severely limits players' choice and pacing. Not only is it now impossible to fully upgrade all weapons in a single playthrough, but it also discourages experimentation. Why try a new weapon if you know you won't be able to level it up in time? Essence now serves almost exclusively as currency for healing items. Combined with the fact that crystal skulls give you discounts at shops, you'll rarely, if ever, run out of restorative supplies. While this may sound helpful on paper, it robs the game of its once tense resource management. In the original, choosing between healing items or a weapon upgrade added meaningful strategy. In Sigma 2, the choice has been made for you. Another example of this reduced depth is the Lives of the Thousand Gods item. In Ninja Gaiden 2, you could choose when to use it, saving it as a healing item for tough tests of valor or brutal boss fights. In Sigma 2, picking one up immediately increases your max health on the spot, removing any decision making. Sure, it's more accessible, but it's another area where player agency has been sacrificed for the sake of streamlining. All these adjustments point to a common theme. Sigma 2 is simply easier, significantly so. I played both versions on the Path of the Warrior difficulty setting. In the original on Xbox 360 I died a lot, whether in hectic enemy encounters or grueling boss fights. In Sigma 2, not a single death. I didn't even need to use a Talisman of Rebirth, highlighting how much easier this version is. While this makes the game more approachable for newcomers, it also dulls what made Ninja Gaiden 2 so memorable. The thrill of overcoming overwhelming odds, the fear of death, the satisfaction of finally surviving that one fight you thought was impossible. Sigma 2 may be more forgiving, but it's also less rewarding. The most immediately noticeable shift Sigma 2 makes is in regards to the gore, or rather the lack thereof. Where Ninja Gaiden 2 had arms, legs and heads flying in a crimson ballet of violence, Sigma 2 opts for purplish essence sprays and limb removals that instantly dissipate enemies into glowing mist. The result is cleaner, less graphic and far less satisfying. The carnage of the original gave each blow a sense of weight and consequence. In Sigma 2, your attacks can feel like they're slicing through ghosts rather than enemies, robbing the combat of its gritty edge and impact. Another major shift in Ninja Gaiden Sigma 2 is the significant reduction in enemy counts. While this change arguably makes battles more manageable and less chaotic, it also strips away much of the raw intensity and tension that made Ninja Gaiden 2 so exhilarating. The original thrived on controlled chaos. Narrowly surviving wave after wave of enemies was part of the thrill. In Sigma 2, that chaotic magic is dialed down, likely in an effort to improve performance on the PlayStation 3. Unfortunately, that improvement comes at the cost of spectacle. To compensate for fewer enemies on screen, enemy health has been increased substantially, which leads to a different kind of frustration. Enemies that went down quickly are now much harder to kill. What used to be quick, kinetic encounters often devolve into repetitive slugfests. Even standard mobs can feel like damage sponges, forcing you to chip away at their health long past the point of fun. Beyond combat mechanics, enemy placements, item locations and save point distribution have all been shuffled around. Some changes are minor, others disorienting, but the most disappointing alteration is the complete removal of the test of valor. These optional gauntlets were brutal and often frustrating, but they served as excellent skill checks for dedicated players. Stripping them out removes not just challenge, but content that rewarded mastery. At the end of each chapter, Sigma 2 also drops the karma score screen. Since the karma system never affected gameplay directly and was only used for competition between players, I don't mind the removal of this scoring system. Some enemy types have been outright removed, most notably the underwater bomb enemies, along with several large-scale encounters. The result? Entire areas that once housed intense battles now feel oddly empty, like set pieces waiting for actors who never show up. Even some of the smaller puzzles, such as those in chapter 12, have been cut, further simplifying the experience and flattening the game's pacing. To its credit, Sigma 2 introduces a few new enemy variants to try to fill the gap. Demonic creatures like the Black Demon in chapter 4 make their debut, alongside returning fiends from the first Ninja Gaiden. These new additions offer some visual variety, and the darker fiend variants are serviceable, but they're rarely as engaging to fight as the series' most iconic foes, like the blood-hungry werewolves. However, one addition is downright baffling: Ghostfish. Those infamously annoying flying piranha-like creatures have been added to areas where they didn't exist before, and they are everywhere. Their inclusion feels less like a legitimate challenge and more like a cheap trick to irritate the player. It's the kind of decision that makes you wonder if someone at Team Ninja was just trying to piss players off. On the brighter side, Chapter 10, long considered a low point in the original, is noticeably improved. The overwhelming auto rocket launcher enemies have been toned down, making the chapter more forgiving and far less rage-inducing. It's one of the few instances where Sigma 2's adjustments clearly work in its favor. When it comes to boss battles, Ninja Gaiden Sigma 2 makes a deliberate effort to improve upon its predecessor's more infamous missteps, and in some areas it succeeds. One of the most noticeable improvements is the fight against Gigadeath in chapter 3. In the original, this electrified monstrosity was a frustrating, borderline unfair encounter. In Sigma 2, it's been rebalanced to be far less punishing. While it's still not a standout boss fight by any means, at least it no longer feels like a cheap encounter designed to frustrate players. Even better, some of Ninja Gaiden 2's worst bosses have been removed entirely. The infamously dull giant deathworm and the repetitive twin Quetzalcoatl dragons are both gone. These encounters were sluggish, poorly designed and did little more than pad out the runtime with frustration. Their removal is a clear win. The same goes for the double nuclear armadillo battle, another redundant and uninspired encounter that's thankfully been cut. These omissions show that Team Ninja was willing to trim the fat where necessary, and it genuinely improves the pacing of the game. Unfortunately, not every change to the boss roster is for the better. The fight against the water dragon has been significantly altered, and not in a good way. In the original, you battled this beast while gliding across the water's surface, allowing for freedom of movement and dynamic combat. In Sigma 2, the fight is restricted to a stationary platform, completely removing the fluidity and making the encounter feel stiff and claustrophobic. As if that weren't enough, the developers decided to add Ghostfish into the mix, bombarding you mid-fight for no apparent reason other than to irritate. The result? What was once a serviceable boss fight is now arguably the worst in Sigma 2, a baffling downgrade that was totally unnecessary. On the brighter side, your encounters with Genshin, Ryu's rival and arguably the most compelling antagonist in the game, have been tweaked for the better. Not only can you now Izuna drop Genshin, which feels incredibly satisfying, but the second battle with him no longer includes extra enemies. It's just you and him, one-on-one, as it should be. This welcome change extends to other boss fights as well. Sigma 2 generally removes enemy reinforcements from boss encounters, allowing the spotlight to remain on the boss itself. It allows you to focus on fighting the boss without getting distracted. Sigma 2 also introduces a handful of new boss fights, though the results are mixed. In chapter 1, you face off against a giant Buddha statue twice. The first encounter is so easy you can likely beat it on your first try without breaking a sweat. The second is slightly more demanding but still relatively tame. Later in chapter 4, you square off against the Statue of Liberty, now possessed and hostile. It's a visually memorable moment, but the fight itself is awkwardly paced and mechanically underwhelming. While these statue bosses aren't offensively bad like the ones they replaced, they They don't exactly leave a lasting impression either. They feel like filler, larger than life battles that look cool in screenshots but play out with all the excitement of hitting a stone wall with a stick. They're serviceable, but that's about it. The same goes for the Black Dragon boss fight. Visually it's a showstopper, towering, menacing and dramatic in scale, but once the battle begins, it's all bark and no bite. The fight lacks any real tension or complexity, and the dragon goes down far too quickly to ever feel like a proper threat. What should be a highlight moment ends up as just another flashy speed bump on the way to the credits, cool to look at, but ultimately forgettable. In Sigma 2, you're no longer limited to just playing as Ryu. The game introduces 3 additional playable characters: Momiji, Rachel and Ayane, each starring in their own dedicated chapters, 5, 9 and 11 respectively. Each has a distinct fighting style, and while the variety is a nice change of pace, none of them quite match the fluidity, power or sheer fun of playing as Ryu. If I had to pick a favorite, Momiji easily stood out. Her combos felt the most intuitive and I found her gameplay smooth and accessible without sacrificing power. Ayane on the other hand was the most difficult for me to enjoy. Her playstyle felt awkward and less responsive, and her chapter pits her against some of the toughest enemies in the game, making her section feel more like a chore than a welcome detour. These character-specific chapters also come with their own bosses, some of which are entirely new. The Tengu brothers, introduced during Momiji's chapter, later show up again for a rematch with Ryu. They're not exactly the pinnacle of boss design, but at least they're fair and decently paced, offering a solid, if unspectacular challenge. Rachel's boss encounter brings back Marbus, a returning foe from the original Ninja Gaiden. Unfortunately, his fight remains as dull and underwhelming as ever. He doesn't evolve much from his prior appearance, and the fact that you fight him again later as Ryu only emphasizes the repetition. His double inclusion doesn't add drama, it just feels like padding. Meanwhile, Obaba, a villain originally introduced in Ninja Gaiden Dragon Sword on the Nintendo DS, makes her console debut here. Instead of Ryu, you face her as Ayane. The fight is visually striking but mechanically simplistic. She goes down easily. That said, after trudging through Ayane's tough chapter, I wasn't exactly complaining that it ended with a breather. In the end, while not every addition hits the mark, the expanded boss roster in Sigma 2 is a clear step up from the original. That's not a particularly high bar, as Ninja Gaiden 2's bosses were notoriously uneven, often poorly balanced and frustratingly cheap. At least in Sigma 2, most boss encounters feel more intentional, more manageable and crucially less annoying. The Team Missions mode in Sigma 2 replaces the mission mode that was available as downloadable content for the original Ninja Gaiden 2 on Xbox 360. This time around it allows you to team up with another player, or if you're like me and playing post-server shutdown, an AI partner, to take on waves of enemies and, depending on the mission, bosses as well. Unfortunately, the AI partner is borderline useless, leaving you to carry the entire mission solo. They're more of a liability than a help, often standing around or getting knocked out when you need them most. And while the idea of tag teaming through combat gauntlets sounds fun on paper, the execution falls flat. On higher difficulties, especially Ultimate Ninja, these missions become downright punishing. Picture this: fighting 3 bosses at once, or facing off against 2 Buddha statues while simultaneously being harassed by regular enemies. It's not just challenging, it's poorly designed chaos, seemingly engineered more to break your spirit than to test your skill. If you've managed to beat these on the hardest difficulty, you have my undying respect, seriously. Sure, team missions technically add some replay value, but for me they didn't offer enough incentive to keep coming back. The harder missions lean more toward frustrating than fun, and without a reliable co-op partner, the experience quickly wears thin. Frankly, I'd rather just replay the story mode, where the challenge feels more fair and the pacing more rewarding. New Game Plus has been removed in Sigma 2, but in its place is the challenge mode, essentially a mission select feature that allows you to replay individual chapters while retaining all your weapons and upgrades. Instead of grinding through the entire game again, you can now jump straight into your favorite segments and aim for the highest possible karma score. Honestly, this is a welcome improvement. It gives you far more flexibility in how you want to revisit the game. Want to replay the best combat encounters or boss fights? Go ahead. Want to skip notoriously frustrating levels like chapter 10? You finally can. It's a smart, player-friendly change that respects your time and gives the game some added longevity without forcing another full playthrough. Just like I did after finishing Ninja Gaiden 2 on the Xbox 360, I decided to test my skills in Sigma 2 by jumping into Path of the Mentor difficulty. In the original game I was quickly humbled, dying repeatedly in chapter 1 alone, but in Sigma 2 I breezed through the same chapter with barely a scratch. It's a clear and undeniable sign of just how much easier and more forgiving this version is compared to the brutally punishing Xbox 360 original. On the surface, Sigma 2 looks great for a PS3 title. The frame rate is more stable than the often choppy Ninja Gaiden 2, character models are cleaner, and the environments have been given a fresh coat of digital polish. There's more color, more light, and more cinematic camera angles. It's flashier, brighter, and more stylized overall. But with that graphical facelift comes a strange paradox. It somehow feels less visually impactful. The original Ninja Gaiden 2 may have been rougher around the edges, but it had a gritty visceral look that matched its brutal tone. The lighting was moodier, the blood spatter soaked the environment, the world felt like it bled and breathed with every battle. Sigma 2 by contrast feels more sterile. The lack of blood and environmental damage, like dismembered bodies remaining on the battlefield, strips the world of its weight and menace. The story remains poorly executed, with Ryu continuing his tradition of saying very little, which is for the best. But side characters sometimes suffer from stilted delivery. The script doesn't help much either, but let's be honest, no one's here for the story. We're here to kill demons and look cool doing it. Ninja Gaiden Sigma 2 is a fascinating case study in game design philosophy, an experiment in rebalancing a punishing visceral experience to appeal to a broader audience. In many ways, it's a smarter, cleaner and more accessible version of Ninja Gaiden 2. The performance is smoother, the visuals are sharper, and the added content, new characters, extra chapters, cooperative missions, offers more variety than the original. On paper, it sounds like an across-the-board upgrade, but in practice that refinement comes at a cost. The reduced enemy counts, toned down gore, streamlined systems, and softened difficulty all combine to dull the razor-sharp edge that defined the original. There's a certain irony at play here. In making Ninja Gaiden 2 more palatable, Team Ninja unintentionally muted some of what made it great. That's not to say Sigma 2 is a bad game, far from it. It's still one of the best action titles in its genre, with fast, fluid combat, deep mechanics and a satisfying core gameplay loop. For PlayStation players who missed out on the original Xbox 360 version, Sigma 2 is a more approachable and polished alternative. It's the most user-friendly entry in the modern Ninja Gaiden trilogy, and an ideal introduction to the series. And yet, I still prefer Ninja Gaiden 2. For all its roughness, its unfair moments and its sheer difficulty, it had a pulse, a rawness that made every victory hard-earned and every fight meaningful. It was exhausting, yes, but it was also unforgettable. Sigma 2 is more forgiving, more balanced and arguably more refined, but that refinement comes at the cost of ambition. It feels like a version of Ninja Gaiden 2 that's afraid to challenge you the same way. In the end, Sigma 2 is a great game, but not the definitive Ninja Gaiden 2. That title still belongs to the 2008 original, with all its blood, chaos and uncompromising edge. It may have been brutal, but it never stopped daring you to be better. And sometimes that's what makes a game unforgettable.
Darkness is destined to lift in the end. I still have much left